Hello everyone! We are starting our Anatomy and Physiology course from Chapter 1, which is called An Introduction to the Human Body. Part 1. Overview of Anatomy and Physiology. We need to know what is anatomy and what is physiology. Anatomy is the study of structure. It means anatomy describes the human body, what parts it has and where those parts are located. For example, human body has 2 arms and 2 legs. Our heart is located in the thoracic cavity. Thoracic cavity is located above the abdominal cavity, and so on. There are several subdivisions of anatomy, and there are also several ways to study anatomy according to those subdivisions. What is microscopic anatomy? That is study of anatomy using a microscope. What can we see in the microscopic slide? Well, we can see cells, cell structure, how those cells are born, how they divide, how they die. That is cytology, study of cells. We also can see different tissue, muscle tissue, epithelial tissue, and that would be histology. Next one, developmental anatomy. It's a study of a human body, starting from a tiny cell, zygote, and growing into embryo, into fetus, then baby is born, then baby becomes a child, the child is growing into teenager, adult, and keeps developing, keeps changing during the whole life. That is developmental anatomy. Part of it is embryology. That would be a study of an embryo only. Example. And finally, everything what we can see with our own eyes, what we can touch, that is gross or macroscopic anatomy. Well, there are 2 ways also to study macroscopic anatomy: regional and systemic anatomy. Regional anatomy would be helpful for surgeons, for example. When a surgeon is about to do an operation, they should know what layers they will be cutting and what is under each layer. If they are making cuts through the abdominal cavity, first it will be skin, then there will be some layer of adipose fat tissue, then there will be muscle layer, then they will get into the abdominal cavity and they need to know what organs will be right there. So that's all studying of one region of the body, abdominal cavity. In our class, we are using a little bit different approach, systemic anatomy. It means we will be studying the human body by the organ system. One chapter will be, for example, a respiratory system, where you will study lungs, trachea, bronchi, nasal cavity, and how exactly the respiratory system receives oxygen for our body. Okay, next slide, overview of anatomy and physiology 2. Here are your essential tools that you should have for study of anatomy. First of all, mastery of anatomical terminology. One of the difficulties of this class. There are so many terms, and please make sure to make your cards and study terms on time, because without knowing those terms, it won't be possible for you to study anatomy and physiology. So, knowing of terminology. After you study anatomy and physiology, you will not say, if it's a professional conversation, you won't say that a liver is above the large intestine. You will say that liver is superior to the colon. That is a anatomical terminology. Next one, observation. Looking at the structures and organs in the picture, in the video, manipulating or working with observing cadaver. All that is observation. Also working with microscopic slides and working with models. Next one, manipulation and palpation. That's when you're doing some work while studying anatomy. You are disassemble and assemble back the models. You're working with microscopic slides. You are working with a cadaver, and that is palpation, touching. Manipulation, it can be, for example, dissection, when you are cutting tissues and see what is inside there. You will be doing dissection of the eyeball. That's example of dissection, and that is manipulation. Your book also mentions auscultation, but I wouldn't agree with your book here, because when you do auscultation, which means you are listening to the sounds coming from the human body, how the lungs are working, what is the heart rate, you are studying the process. So auscultation would better work as a study of physiology, not anatomy. But again, it's my opinion. A review of anatomy and physiology 3. Now, our definition for physiology. Physiology is the study of function at many levels. Subdivisions are based on organ systems, renal or cardiovascular physiology. What does it mean? When you already know the structure, you need to learn now how those structures work together to provide some certain function of the body. For example, when you study anatomy of the digestive system, you study all the organs: oral cavity, esophagus, stomach, small and large intestine, liver, and so on. You study their structure and their location. When you study a physiology of the digestive system, that's when you study how exactly and why liver produces bile and pancreas produces digestive enzymes, and how muscles inside of the esophageal wall push the food down to the stomach, and how stomach digests food. Pay attention every time when you study anatomy and physiology, and you need to learn some physiological process, how stomach is digesting food, how that bone is growing. You must read your book. You must learn that process, not only using this PowerPoint, but also read your book. Overview of anatomy and physiology 4. Essential tools for study of physiology would be ability to focus at many levels, from systemic to cellular and molecular. It means when we study liver, for example, physiology of liver, you need to know that liver is part of the digestive system. It's a necessary organ. And inside of the liver, there are special cells, hepatocytes, and you will need to learn their structure and what exactly they produce and how they work at different levels. For learning anatomy and physiology, you also need to know basic physical and chemical principles. To understand how our brain sends commands to our muscles for them to contract, you need to know what is electrical current. To understand how our blood carries oxygen, you need to understand what are molecules and what are atoms and how chemical reactions going on. Next slide, principle of complementarity. Anatomy and physiology are always studied together. That's the best way to study them. They are inseparable. And function, or physiology, always reflects structure or anatomy. It means anatomy goes first. You must learn it first. Only after that you'll be able to understand physiology. And the structure determines function. What a structure can do depends on its specific form. Let's say, can you expect your bone to contract and produce movement, to shorten and produce movement? No. The bone has a different purpose, to keep your body straight. And what are you using to contract and produce movement? That would be a muscle. So different structure of a bone and muscle results in different function.